Joining us today are Nicola and Chi from Lloyds Bank. They'll be providing some insights into the discussion around greening the built environment. In particular, retrofitting, build standards, the economics of retrofitting emissions, logistics, finance infrastructure, and how to measure progress and success. That's quite a lot to get through, so let's dive right on in. Nicola, what are the challenges and opportunities associated with greening the built environment?
If we take the challenges of greening the built environment first, I think there's a part around having a defined playbook of what good looks like. So, i.e., we can then work through where a building is today to where we need it to be to improve the EPCs or the underlying sort of sustainability of the building, which is when we talk about the opportunity part of what we're trying to achieve from a efficiency perspective, but also the emissions of buildings. We know that buildings generate about a third of UK emissions as well. So then moving on to some of the challenges of how we get the built environment to where we want it to be, that's probably around, we talked around that playbook pack almost of what good to look like, but equally then the supply chain to make sure we've got the technology that's ready to retrofit at scale, because we know the number of buildings across the UK as well. And then the technology as well is a technology that's constantly evolving, and therefore we want to make sure what we do today is right, actually, not just for the today, but also for the longer term. So it's not an easy answer, but it's something we'll come back to probably more and more through this discussion this morning. But there are, I suppose, a part for us all to play on that as well.
I think I just add to what Nicola is saying there, but maybe just explore a little bit more about the opportunities as I would see them. So I think it's an opportunity for us to engage more positively with nature. At the moment, we haven't done that. And it's not just about sort of putting beehives on buildings. We're talking about engaging with it to put greenery on our roofs and on our fronts. We need to think about mitigation and adaptation. We can use nature to do that. We have an opportunity to address fuel poverty. We know that that is an issue in the UK. We have some of the leakiest building stock in Europe. We need to do something about it. And the energy prices are very high. And then lastly, in terms of opportunities, what I think about is the opportunities to really revitalise our job market. So we need to bring young people into this market. A lot of young people are enthused about the net zero challenge. They want to do something about that. So we need to make sure that we're reaching out across the nation into diverse backgrounds as well, men and women, and bringing them into this exciting new industry.
And what integrated solutions and options are there currently, or that we need to get into place to be able to deliver net zero?
And it's a great question of what have we got now today. And I think each building's different. Each building's unique on what it needs, whether it be solar panels to help with the energy efficiency part, whether it be the heat pumps as well, the integration of those, or better insulation. So there's different parts, and that's where actually from a Lloyds perspective we have this great tool. It's called the Green Building Tool, and it looks at each building individually by sort of postcode, where the EPCs, so the energy, is today from the performance side, and equally the opportunities within that building and the potential, I would say, of that building as well. And that's the part where this tool really helps give options and sort of costs, and therefore the benefits of doing it at a building by building level, rather than thinking there's one solution that fits all.
But this isn't an inexpensive direction. How can transformation be funded and financed?
We talk about actually what solutions right for each building, that financing part as well, because actually at the moment where cost of energy and things are, actually there's then a payback period for some of this, because actually then the bills for that building go down. Equally then funding solutions for different types of buildings will probably need to be a mix of both public and private type funding. But also, as we talked about scaling the technology earlier on, that will start, and that's one of the challenges of making things more scalable, therefore becoming more affordable. So it's definitely something that's been looked at, and that's where we sort of talked around the Lloyds Bank tool of that green and built environment tool, because then it starts engaging those conversations of actually what are the opportunities, what is the payback, and how, well, from a banking side as well, then we can help companies through this as well.
What are the appropriate measures to be able to benchmark success?
I would say for new build and retrofit, we're pretty much looking at the same sort of thing. So, very, very basic. It's not perfect, but use your EPC. At Lloyds Bank, we would generally be saying, a high EPC B or A will future-proof you to the into what we expect the regs to result in the next 10 years or so. So that's the kind of level that you should be aiming at as a very minimum. If you want to do take a more holistic approach, then you could look at something like BREEAM, that standard, or LEED, which become not just about the fabric of the building, but also how it looks within its in terms of its social impact and other kind of measures as well. And then I guess the most challenging standard that we tend to see people use, not as much obviously, is passive house. So those are three standards that are definitely out there and being used. And then on the retrofit side, there is the PAS 2035, which is the framework that you can use for Trustmark users for retrofitting. So all of that is out there and ready to be used by people. I think, as Nicola was saying, it's really about getting people to engage with it and do it more and more so that the supply chain upskills in this space.
So can we get to where we need to be by the time we need to be there?
Yes. As a sustainability person, you tend to be quite positive anyway. So I describe myself as a possibilist in this sense. So yes, I think it's absolutely possible. But there are there are many things that we need to kind of get into play first. The key thing for me is really around educating and bringing everybody with us. So there is this concept of just transition that we are engaging with more and more within the real estate and housing team at Lloyds Bank. We're not just thinking about the transition to net zero, but we're thinking about how we do that. Who is going to be impacted along the way? So, how do you engage with your employees? How do you engage with your supply chain? How do you ensure that vulnerable people aren't disadvantaged by this transition? And I think once you start consulting in that way with your stakeholders and reach a consensus going forward, everyone's going to buy into it, and then it's going to happen much more quickly. So that's how I think ultimately we're going to get there. It's really around that communication piece, and once the will and the consensus has been formed, nothing can stop us.
There are so many questions, maybe more than answers, but do we need to rely on legislation, or is it more about education and the desire to change?
In terms of technology, which we've touched upon, there are definitely answers. We do not live in the coldest country in the world. There are definitely solutions to improved thermal performance, etc. So the technology, as far as I'm concerned, is clearly there. It really is about, as you say, us bridging the gap between our current skills level and being introduced into these new ways of doing things. So that's there. But of course, there are lots of other pieces. There is, a policy piece. There is a financial piece. We all do need to do our part within the entire ecosystem. But the footprints, if you like, are there to do that. We know the direction we need to go. And I think what we need to not be scared of is making mistakes, because what I've learned is that it's rarely perfect the first time around, but it's achievable. And people are going to make mistakes, but as long as we're moving in the right direction, that's got to be better than not doing so at all.
I would echo all of the thoughts Chi said. The other part around it is we are seeing with newer buildings that are being built that they are more sustainable on the whole, and particularly sort of supporting that home. So we know it can be done. It's then how we roll that out at a much bigger scale of the existing environment. So I definitely think the solutions and the way forward are there. It is now scaling what's there to make sure there's the awareness piece. I think the education piece that you touched on for both property owners, landlords, but tenants, and how we can all play our part as well. And I think it's that we spend a lot of time in buildings. Buildings are part of where we live, where we work, where we socialise. And I think that's the part where there's a real responsibility on every single one of us to do our bit, and it's that then will magnify effectively. There is some legislation around the sector. It is a evolving part, I mean, she touched earlier around wanting to make it a just transition. So we want to make sure it's fair and accessible to everybody. And I think that's the key part of where there's a very fine line of getting it right from the future part and getting it right for everybody today as well. So it's a balance. So it will be a mix of education, it will be a mix of the technologies and the options and that playback of what good looks like part, and then equally the sort of the legislation and regulation guidance as well.
Absolutely. I think there are a lot of things that will come to play over the next 30 years that we can't even begin to imagine now. So we have to continue on the assumption that we can do this. We know the technology's there. We know it's not beyond us in terms of skills. Let's just try and make it happen. I think we very much have that approach at the bank. It's like, let's look at this wider ecosystem and where we can intervene to support. Yeah, absolutely. It's not beyond us, and what I think there is an issue with is making sure that everyone understands what's in it for them. So it's very easy to set out an economic case or not for retrofitting, for example, as you might if you use the green business buildings tool that we have. You've got the estate agents like JLL and CBRE that have done all of the research to demonstrate that buildings that are built to a higher standard have a higher value, stickier yields, stickier tenants, higher yields, and all the rest of it. So that's out there. But there's almost a hearts and minds thing where people need to understand this is why I should do it. You mentioned legislation a bit earlier. I think the consensus is that we could do with stronger signals. There's been some inconsistency, particularly over the last year or so, in terms of where we're going. But hopefully that will bed down next year. But once we have those signals and everyone's clear that this is the direction, I have no doubt that it will happen and everyone will understand what's in it for them. And ultimately, we all want to live, as Nicola was saying, in the best built environment that we can.
Well, thank you both for your time and insights today.